Mr. Fletcher, can I follow up on the questions that Justice Thomas and Justice Alito have been asking about the facility-specific statutes? I think it was wise to shift your focus to those because of their references to health and safety. But I find it difficult because the language of each of those statutes is different, and not all of them reference health and safety. So, for example, I think the one on long-term care facilities is your best, because that's the one that also refers to or requires skilled nursing facilities to establish and maintain an infection control program. That one, I think, gives you a stronger case than the ones that don't mention health and safety at all. Or, for example, for ambulatory surgical centers, the provision on which you rely describes the benefits provided to an individual, and then it lists the kind of services that would be covered, right? And then parenthetically, it says, performed at an ambulatory surgical center, parentheses, that meets health and safety and other standards specified by the Secretary. It seems to me a heavier lift to say that that kind of aside in a parenthetical is a grant of authority to CMS to impose this kind of vaccination requirement on those who work at the ambulatory surgical center. So I guess my question is this. One, the government here seeking the stay of the injunction has the burden of showing likelihood of success on the merits, and I understand because of space limits and the number of statutes on which you're now relying, it would be hard to make the specific case for each of these provisions. But what if I think some of the provisions might support you and others don't? This was an omnibus rule, and even though the Secretary in a chart identified all these specific provisions, we don't really have before us the structural and textual arguments directed at each of these provisions. So what if I think some do and some don't? In an omnibus rule, what am I supposed to do?
Well, so we agree entirely that the focus ought to be on the statutory text, and one of our complaints with the district court decisions in these cases is that they blew past all of those distinctions and didn't focus on the text at all. So we absolutely agree the text of these provisions should be the court's focus. In terms of how to think about them, I understand it's unwieldy. There are 15 different provisions. I would group them into two categories. There are 11 or so that we cite at pages 5 to 6 of our reply brief that include that specific health and safety language in different formulations, but all of them specifically referring to requirements in the interests of patient health and safety. And as we've explained, we think that this is the paradigmatic health and safety regulation, and that's reinforced by the consensus of the medical community, by other regulators, by practices of providers. Now, there are a few statutes that we cite at page 9 of our reply brief that don't include that specific language. Those statutes are the ones applicable to providers that employ about 3% of all of the workers covered by the rule. Now, our view is that all of those statutes still give the Secretary the authority to set standards or requirements for participating providers. And if you look at those provisions, what you find is that Congress was a little bit less detailed. In the hospital provision, the 1395XE9, the preceding 8 sections all detail relatively nuanced, very specific requirements for hospitals. And then the E9 adds, and such other requirements as may be necessary.
But what if I disagree? So I understand that your position is that all of these granted the Secretary authority. But what if I disagree? What if I say, for example, you suggested in a footnote in your reply brief that because such a small percentage of employees are covered by the statutes that don't reference health and safety, that we should just allow the injunction to remain in place only as to those. And let's say that I disagree with you that every single one of the statutes that references health and safety could be interpreted as a grant of rulemaking authority for the reason I suggested with ambulatory surgical centers. The rule is an omnibus rule. It wasn't adopted on a facility-by-facility basis. So if I assume the premise that I disagree with you that every single statute grants this authority, why shouldn't then we just leave the Fifth Circuit's injunction in place?
Well, because I think to the extent you're looking at likelihood of success, that's the factor that this would be relevant to. I think that does depend, as you say, on the authorities as to each category of providers. And the Secretary included, in some sense, it's an omnibus regulation. He did it all at once, but he included specific severability language that we cite in that footnote. It's at page 61,608 and said if any of these provisions are no good, then the rest ought to stand. And so I think if you disagree with us on either the provisions that lack health and safety language or if you disagree with us on the ones that have it, although I want to talk about both of those things to hopefully persuade you otherwise, I think the result would be we don't have a likelihood of success at obtaining prevailing on those provisions. But that wouldn't justify allowing the injunctions to remain in place as to all of the other provisions, especially those that cover the vast majority of workers So I think that's the approach we'd suggest if that's where you find yourself.